The charge nurse's hand froze over her keyboard mid-sentence, and I knew, before she said a single word, that the next 10 minutes were going to unravel 19 years of a story I'd let my husband believe. She used to volunteer here, I think. A long time ago, Walter was saying to the triage nurse, one hand on my shoulder, the other still shaking from the phone call 20 minutes earlier. She might be able to help keep us calm while we wait. She's good in a crisis. I let him say it. There wasn't time to correct him, and there hadn't been time in 19 years either. My name is Eleanor Whitmore. Everyone but the hospital records calls me Nora. I'm 67. 26 years ago, I built the trauma protocol that was, at that exact moment, keeping our 8-year-old grandson alive 2 floors below us. Walter didn't know that. In about 11 minutes, so would everyone who needed to know. But that isn't where this starts. It starts 19 years ago, at a grief support group neither of us wanted to be at, where a widower named Walter Reyes Whitmore sat 2 chairs down from a woman who introduced herself only as Nora, retired, medical field. He didn't push for more. Neither of us was in a state to give more. We married 2 years later. I told him once that I used to be a doctor. Before my hand, I held it up, the faint tremor still visible if you knew to look for it. Before my hand made that impossible. He nodded, kissed my knuckles, and never asked again. I let that be the whole story. It was easier than the true one. The true one was this. 26 years ago, a charter bus carrying a high school marching band went off an overpass 3 miles from Ashford General. I was the trauma surgeon on call. I operated for 11 straight hours, moving from gurney to gurney, and I wrote the protocol we used that night on index cards between cases because nothing like it existed yet. 22 kids came through those doors. 21 went home. The nerve damage in my hand started that night and finished 2 years later, ending the only career I'd ever wanted. I never told Walter which child didn't make it. I never told anyone the specifics anymore. I just stopped walking into hospitals if I could help it. For 19 years, until tonight, there was an anniversary dinner, 4 years into our marriage, that I nearly didn't survive without excusing myself twice. Because the restaurant was 3 blocks from Ashford General, and some nights the building itself was enough. Walter thought I was being sentimental about our marriage. I let him think that too. Tonight, our daughter called at 9:40 p.m. Milo had been hit by a car 2 blocks from his school bus stop. Ashford General, the only level 1 trauma center in the county. Walter drove. I sat in the passenger seat with both hands pressed flat against my knees, willing them to stay still, and said nothing the whole way, because I already knew that walking back through those doors was going to cost me something I'd spent 19 years avoiding. If you're still with me, drop a 1, because what happened over the next 11 minutes wasn't about me being recognized. It was about a hospital recognizing itself. The waiting room hadn't changed in 26 years. Same tile, different scuff marks. Walter paced. I sat very still, the way I used to sit in the minutes before a case, and for a moment, just a moment, I let myself hope that no one here would remember. That I could simply be a frightened grandmother in a plastic chair, the way Walter believed I was, and go home afterward, still being nobody's story but this family's. Most of the staff who'd worked that night in 1998 had retired, moved on, or passed away. The hope wasn't unreasonable, it was just wrong. A resident jogged past with a chart, reciting trauma criteria under her breath, the way residents do when they're nervous. And I heard myself finishing her sentence before I could stop it. Quietly, automatically, the exact wording from a set of index cards I hadn't looked at in decades. She stopped mid-stride and turned around. "I'm sorry," she said. "Did you just say the Whitmore criteria?" I hadn't heard my own name attached to that phrase in so long, it took me a second to recognize it as mine. "That's the protocol we still use for pediatric blunt trauma triage," she said slowly, studying my face now instead of her chart. "Every resident here memorizes it first year. Are you—" She stopped herself, like the question was too large to finish out loud, and jogged instead toward the nurse's station, chart still in hand. Walter looked at me. What was that about? Old work, I said. A long time ago. He didn't push. He never did. That had always been the problem. Behind the desk, the charge nurse, a woman with 20-some years on the floor, old enough to have been a first-year nurse 26 years ago, looked up at whatever the resident had just told her, then looked out at the waiting room, then at me, and went completely still. She typed something into the system. Her screen returned a record that hadn't been pulled up in years. A staff ID, her old credentials, her name. Dr. Whitmore, she said, coming around the desk toward me, and something in the way she said it made 3 other people at that station turn their heads. Dr. Eleanor Whitmore. Walter looked at me like I'd been replaced by a stranger mid-sentence. Doctor? The charge nurse didn't wait for an answer. She picked up the internal phone. This is Denise, at the front desk. I need Dr. Okafor Page to triage. Tell him it's about the Whitmore protocol. Tell him she's here. Within 90 seconds, the entire rhythm of that waiting room changed. Not one person walking toward me. A whole system rearranging itself. A resident quietly wiped dust off a plaque on the far wall I hadn't looked at in years. A plaque with my name and a photograph from a version of my face I barely recognized anymore. Someone paged patient transport to hold an elevator. A social worker appeared to walk our daughter and Walter into a private family room I later learned was normally reserved for hospital board members, not grieving families in the waiting room. Nobody applauded. Nobody stood up in unison. It was quieter than that, and somehow louder. An entire hospital, floor by floor, adjusting itself around a name it hadn't said out loud in 26 years. Dr. Okafor arrived at a near run, mask still hanging from one ear, and stopped in front of me like he needed a second to confirm I was real. I trained on your protocol in med school, he said. I didn't know you were. He stopped, shook his head. Your grandson's stable. We're taking him up now. I'd like you in the room, if you're willing. I've used your work my entire career and never once thought I'd get to say that to your face. I looked at Walter. For the first time in 19 years, he didn't answer for me. I'm willing, I said. We didn't talk in the elevator. Walter stood beside me, hands in his pockets, watching the numbers climb, and I watched him doing the math. 19 years, a widow's group, a hand he'd kissed 1,000 times without ever asking why it shook. Milo came out of surgery 4 hours later. Dr. Okafor found us in the family room and said only, textbook, he's going to be fine, before adding, quieter, because of a protocol somebody wrote on index cards in a hallway 26 years ago. Our daughter cried into my shoulder. Walter stood a foot away, waiting, the way he had never once waited for anything involving me. We drove home near midnight. The rain had stopped. Walter kept both hands on the wheel and didn't speak until the 3rd stoplight. 19 years, he said. You built the trauma protocol that hospital still uses, and I told a nurse you used to volunteer there. You didn't know. I didn't ask. He was quiet for a block. What happened to your hand? Was it that night? The bus? I told him, finally. The parts I'd never said out loud. The 11 hours, the 22 kids, the one who didn't make it. A girl named Callie, whose name I still say to myself every October. He didn't say he was sorry. He just reached over, without looking, and rested his hand over mine on the console, lightly. The way you hold something you've just learned is more fragile and more remarkable than you understood. At home, I went upstairs and came back down with a shadow box I'd kept in the closet for over 2 decades. The hospital's own gift to me the year I left. A photograph, a set of the original index cards laminated behind glass, and a small brass plate with a name on it that wasn't mine. Walter read it slowly. In memory of Callie Marsh, and in honor of the surgeon who gave 21 others the chance to grow up. You never told me her name, he said. You never asked what I lost, I said. Only what I quit. He set the shadow box down gently on the kitchen table, and for a long moment, neither of us said anything else. Then he pulled out the chair across from me, sat down, and asked, really asked, for the first time in 19 years, "Tell me about her. Tell me about all of it. I want to actually know." So I did. 2 weeks later, at Milo's welcome home dinner, someone asked what I used to do before I retired. Walter opened his mouth the way he always did, ready to answer for me the way he had 1,000 times before. Then he stopped himself, looked at me, and closed his mouth instead. I answered the question myself, out loud, for the first time in 19 years. Walter just listened, the way people listen when they've finally learned that some stories were never theirs to tell. Thank you for staying until the end. If this story reminded you of someone you love who quietly carries a chapter they never talk about, ask them about it. Really ask, and then wait long enough to actually hear the answer. See you in the next one.